My journey's brought me to Walsingham Priory in North Norfolk, or what's left of it. Yet another monastic ruin. And it's time to explain why almost all the monasteries, priories, nunneries in this country lie in ruins, because it's not just to do with the passage of time. I've shown you cathedrals still standing. I've shown you churches still standing. Why not the monasteries? And the answer has to do with an extraordinary shake-up in the Christian church in this country in the 16th century. It's the story of the so-called Reformation. Now, I'm starting this story here in Walsingham, because back in the 15th century, this place was considered one of the holiest places in England. There was a story, a local legend, of how a lady from Walsingham in Saxon times had seen a vision of the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, and she had been whisked off by Mary all the way to Nazareth in the Holy Land and back again. And the priory at Walsingham was built to protect a little wooden chapel she had built to thank Mary for this extraordinary experience.
Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us.
Throughout the medieval period, this fantastical story inspired pilgrims to come here to Walsingham, a tradition that's been revived over the past 100 years. There's an Anglican shrine just down the road. They didn't have cars back then, of course. They walked to Walsingham, sometimes hundreds of miles. They walked the final mile barefoot. And they believed if they made this pilgrimage, if they prayed at the shrine, if they made an offering of money to the priory church, it might cancel out some sins that otherwise might delay their entry into heaven after death. And so this obscure little Norfolk village became one of the most important centres of medieval Christian life. It still inspires people, this place. Not that the pilgrims who come here these days believe necessarily in the old legend, but they use the legend to focus their devotions. The trouble was, back in the 15th century, some brave souls were daring to suggest that the church was using this legend for quite another purpose. Not to focus people's devotions, but rather to get rich. They condemned the practice of selling indulgences, scraps of paper supposedly signed by the Pope that were meant to speed up your entry into heaven. They condemned the practice of selling relics, the bones supposedly of saints and martyrs, as charms to ward off evil. Walsingham, with its shops selling trinkets to the pilgrims, summed up the church, they thought, at its worst. Selling salvation at a price, storing up treasure here on earth at the expense of their superstitious flock. What the problem boiled down to, I think, was a growing sense that the church had become corrupt. And I want you to consider for a second what's left of this incredible pile, Wenlock Priory in Shropshire. The decoration here, for instance, in the chapter house where the monks used to meet to discuss priory business. Now, simple question. Do you think all of this adornment was designed to glorify God? Or was it to pander to the egos of the priors and abbots who commissioned the work? In all honesty, it's hard to tell. But we've come a long way from the early monastic life with its emphasis on poverty and simplicity. In 1521, here in Much Wenlock, there was a squabble over the election of a new prior, and a church commissioner was sent in to resolve the dispute, and his report makes fascinating reading. He was clearly outraged at the monks' abuse of the old monastic rules, the way they were all ignoring the vow of silence and entertaining women within the monastery and keeping hunting dogs and gambling. I mean, you can just picture how out of control this place had got. You compare the behavior of the monks here at Much Wenlock with the suffering of the so-called reformers. For decades, hundreds of ordinary men and women in England had dared criticize the power of the church. They'd struggled for the right to read the Bible in English rather than Latin. They'd struggled for the right to find their own path to God, not a path dictated and controlled by the church. And for that struggle, they'd risked death at the stake. As it turned out, it wasn't the reformers that destroyed the power of the earthly church. It was the king, Henry VIII. He's always remembered as such a hellraiser. All that feasting, all those wives. The fact is, he was actually pretty old-fashioned. Earlier in his reign, he'd been on a pilgrimage to Walsingham. He'd prayed at the shrine. He'd made a gift of money. The priory had used it to reglaze the windows. But like every king since medieval times, Henry had his own reason to resent the church, this rival power in the land, answerable not to him, but to the Pope in Rome. And when the Pope refused to grant him a divorce, he took his revenge. By Act of Parliament, Henry declared the English church must now answer to him, and he closed the monasteries down. The monks were pensioned off. The land was sold to the highest bidder. The locals came in and pillaged the leads off the roofs. And within a decade, these glories of the English landscape lay in ruins. What ended with the Reformation was more than just the monastic tradition. What ended here was the idea of the church as an institution guarding the gates of heaven. In time, a new form of Christianity took hold here in England, in which the church meant simply the people, the congregation, gathering together, and it was up to each of us as individuals to make our peace with God. Like children growing up, we emerged from the shadow of the mother church. From now on, for better or for worse, we were on our own.